Join Dana McVeigh from First 5 California as she explores art and math for children from birth to age 5. Art and math may at first seem to be very different things, but there are many exciting ways that they overlap. In this session, participants will focus on key math concepts that are present in everyday art activities. Participants will explore symmetry, geometry, and measurement involved in creating beautiful art, as well as art with graphs, grids, angles, patterns, number recognition, and much more. Please welcome Dana.
Thank you for joining the 2020 Early Math Symposium. My name is Dana McVeigh. I'm a child development consultant with First 5 California and very pleased to be part of the Early Math Project team. This breakout session will focus on math concepts, obviously, in early education, but also ways to connect those concepts to the tools and materials used in preschool art curriculum. In education, the phrase learning outcome is used a lot. This is frequently presented as a question without support or providing any information. For example, you'll hear, what is the intended learning outcome of this activity? In the world of early education, birth to 5, we know that children learn by doing. And for young children, the doing is often through play. These two notions of desired academic achievement and creative expression can seem contradictory. And then when you add in developmental milestones and school readiness assessment requirements, they can seem even further apart. So when considering curriculum and activities that support the whole child, finding exciting ways that areas of focus can complement each other instead of competing can have amazing results. Art and math seem at first to be very different things, but there are many ways, again, that they overlap. Today, we will discuss 6 of the key math concepts typically taught through preschool math activities and that are present in everyday art activities. The concepts that will focus today will be shapes, patterns, spatial relationships, classification, measurement, and cause and effect. Art activities include any experience a child can have using materials and tools. These experiences encourage the development of a wide variety of skills that are directly connected to the math concepts that I just mentioned. Making art encourages communication and expression. Through art, children learn ways that they can express their thoughts and ideas in visual ways. While this skill easily applies to making and understanding things like graphs and grids that we use a lot in early childhood classrooms, but beyond that, when choosing media, using materials and manipulating tools in their own way to produce something different than what they started with, children realize that there is more than one way to represent their ideas. As they sculpt, draw, and paint, children use tools with a variety of media. This allows practice and increased control in using fine motor skills. Building muscles and developing the hand-eye coordination is essential for self-help skills and academic tasks such as writing. When children make art, they learn to use critical thinking skills and practice problem solving in 2 distinct ways. Convergent problem solving is the ability to gather individual pieces of information and come to a single solution to solve a problem. Whereas divergent problem solving is the ability to gather many pieces of information and consider a variety of possible solutions and outcomes to a problem. Creating art freely or for a specific purpose, making masks, for example, fosters flexible thinking, provides practice associating the observations with a desired result, and making connections that employ both types of problem solving. The creative process by nature is an exercise in cause and effect. Through art, young children can explore mathematical concepts in a creative, different way. When you're thinking about incorporating math concepts into your art activities, the first question that comes to mind is usually, what special supplies will I need? And the good news here is, none. It can help, though, in your planning and your facilitation to think of materials that you have on hand by categories first. Some categories are more conducive to particular concepts than others. It can help planning and facilitation to think of materials by categories first. Some categories are more conducive to a particular concept than others. A suggested list would be drawing materials. Things to scribble and draw with, such as crayons, markers, felt tip, watercolors, all types of pens, pencils, chalk, stick pastels, and don't forget the materials to draw on. Various types and sizes of paper, chalkboards, and whiteboards. Different paint has different characteristics, such as viscosity or pigment saturation, and they react differently when manipulated or mixed. A variety of paint types, such as finger paint, tempera, watercolor, or paint palette sets, non-toxic oils, will mean more possibilities for exploration. Three-dimensional materials, such as Play-Doh, clay, wood, wire, pipe cleaners, modeling compound, will all allow children to build and create up and out. For example, these materials in this category are especially helpful supporting the key concepts related to spatial relationships and measurement. When thinking about collage materials, these could include 3D materials, but also the two-dimensional items, and textiles, such as felt, fabric, cardboard, yarn, string, and the shiny things like glitter and stickers, feathers, and other natural objects that they use, such as leaves or seashells. This category also includes safe and found, free and found items, such as cardboard tubes and egg cartons. So when considering your art materials, the tools are also very important. By offering and using tools of different complexity, it will add to the fine motor development and their critical thinking skills. Some tools to consider are tape, glue, scissors, hole punchers, stencils, and rulers, tools to work with Play-Doh and clay, brushes and rollers and stamps of all sizes. So let's get back to those concepts. Okay. The most basic is shapes. When you think about math terms, geometry is the study of shapes. So when children show interest in exploring shapes and their characteristics, what they're really practicing is early geometry. At this age, children work at exploring and manipulating the shape or objects by feeling the edges, placing and stacking them together, and following the lines or the silhouette. They will begin to distinguish similar shapes by grouping and matching objects, choosing items that are round, like the ball, to try and roll. They will start to identify and name basic shapes in their environment. They will use appropriate language to recognize different shapes and talk about their attributes, such as finding a square on the rug or saying that the clock is a circle. Preschoolers will recognize familiar shapes as parts of other objects, like identifying square windows, a triangle roof, a rectangle door, and older children can describe many types of shapes and the difference between them. They know that a circle is curved and triangles have two short sides, one long, and that a square has four sides that are all equal. Older children can start to look and compare two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes. Identifying basic shape names, comparing, sorting, and classifying them quickly leads to creating them. Before the first example, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the differences between process and product-focused art. The goal of preschool art curriculum is often to encourage children's creativity through developmentally appropriate art experiences. But as we discussed, exposure to art materials can also carry potential for cognitive enrichment as well. When children compare, predict, plan, and problem solve as they create. It also supports physical development by using their small motor skills to write, paint, glue, and use clay. Embedding the key math concepts into this process is simply a matter of facilitation and engagement. It does not require a full departure into product-focused experiences. As we move forward, when viewing the examples for each concept, consider how you can introduce the materials and share the concepts as you maintain the characteristics of process-focused art experiences. Some tips for keeping it process-focused include to approach it just like any other open-ended play. When you've chosen the materials to support a specific key math concept, the child should still lead the experience. Remembering to make the quantities of the materials you've chosen open to the children. Let them use whatever is provided in whatever amounts or quantities that they need to create. Obviously with appropriate ways and not wasteful or destructive, but make sure that you have enough. Provide plenty of time for children to carry out their plans and their explorations. Let children come and go from that art experiences at will, and notice and comment on what you see. Using the vocabulary that supports the key math concepts without correcting or altering their work. Use math language throughout their activity. Take an opportunity to introduce new words with activities such as, this is a pattern, red, white. Or other examples of math language that we can use in preschool is heavy and light, tall, short, round, and rectangular, but add to and not take away from their experience. It's important to say yes to children's ideas. The goal here is exposure, not mastery. So if the conversation and their ideas stray from the original introduction, it's okay, just go with it. You want to try and offer new and interesting materials as they work, especially if they're asking for them by request. Again, it's important to follow their lead. Let children choose whether their art goes home or stays in the classroom. Just remembering that they own it, you don't. So now let's get back to exploring shapes through art. Children are starting to look at and compare two-dimensional that are flat and three-dimensional solid shapes. They are using appropriate language to recognize different shapes by name, and they can talk about their attributes. Some of the art activities that can support this work include shape stamps and gadget painting. Paper collages, tracing and cutting specific shapes, or using shapes to make other objects. Modeling, such as using clay, sticks, or pipe cleaners to hold work in three-dimensional shapes. So looking at these pictures right about now, you're probably thinking, I do art activities like these all the time. And you're right, you do. And that's kind of the point. The math is already there, you just need to highlight it. Some verbal encouragement as they work will support the exploration of shapes and other math concepts. Some things that you can do are to count the different numbers of sides and angles. You can name the features of each shape and what makes them different. Just be a little cautious about injecting rote questions. Instead of asking, what shape is this? Try asking about their thinking, why they chose a particular shape or material. Ask them about what their plan is. And here I'd like to leave a few minutes for you to think about what you can say and what you can offer to further exploit key concept of shape while working with art materials. Our next concept is patterns. Patterns are items in a specific order that repeats, and young children begin showing interest in and increased ability to recognize, reproduce, and create patterns of varying complexity. Very young children begin experience with patterning by noticing and responding to simple repeating sequences. They'll notice repetitive sounds and begin to mimic repetition in songs. They begin to participate in repeating sequences when they attempt to follow sequences when working with materials. For example, a very young child might run and get smocks when he sees the teacher putting out brushes for painting. When it comes to matching patterns, children will often draw the same item or draw in the same order as another child. When creating patterns of their own, their designs begin to show intentional order. And often children will start to paint in certain pairs of colors over and over again. Older children will start extending sequences. They will add complexity when they're creating their depictions. They start to understand, for example, colors of a rainbow are constructed in a certain and specific order. When working on patterns and sequencing skills helps preschoolers begin to understand events in a logical order. It also helps self-regulation and independence as they work toward doing things for themselves, such as getting their socks on before they put their shoes on. Some activities that can support this work are mimicking patterns in nature. Very often we use flowers or seashells or other items for art projects that have inherent patterns within them. Beading and lacing, creating wearable art that follows a pattern or a sequence. Weaving activities are inherently pattern-based. The process is literally repeating a sequence, such as over, under, in, and out, regardless if a pattern is present. You can extend this by adding difficulty and involving patterns by creating them in the design, by alternating colors or textures in a repeating pattern. You can also incorporate sequencing by involving children in the steps of an art activity. For example, when working with watercolors, talk about the necessity of order, that first you have to wet the brush, then you dip it in the paint, then it goes to the paper in order for the media to work. Using a recipe to make Play-Doh is another example of this. You need to mix the dry ingredients first, then the wet, then you add the heat and color. And that order of operations is important for these tasks. While working, use words like first, next, last as you go about your day. Talk about things that have beginning, middle, and an end. Go ahead and think about some of the activities that you do with your art materials that can incorporate sequencing and patterns. Spatial sense is the ability to place items in correct spaces or places using a logical design or a pattern. Children develop increasing understanding of how objects move and fit in different spaces. Spatial activities are designed to help young children understand the world around them and how they interact with it. Children will respond as objects move by watching, tracking movements of an object, and predicting where it will end up or where it will go. They explore how objects fit by rotating and manipulating objects, such as puzzle pieces or filling up buckets or purses. Children will naturally explore a variety of ways that objects can move. Anything that's round, they'll try and roll. So you'll want to consider the physical properties of materials as children are stacking them, and notice when they're stacking them largest to smallest, and developing understanding of how positioning affects how objects move. For example, a child will figure out that they need to turn their bike sideways to get through a smaller space, or that they can go under an object instead of all the way around. So, what does all of that have to do with a young child's mathematical development? Well, when children have the opportunity to explore all of these 2- and 3-dimensional objects in the world around them, they develop the ability to coordinate their movement. By participating in art activities that involve perceptions of objects and their attributes, children can develop cognitive skills that will allow them to see a piece of an object and know that it is part of a whole. For example, they'll see a dog's nose and know that it goes with the rest of an animal. Children become capable of recognizing objects in different orientations. Some activities that can support this work are dioramas, self-portraits, tangrams, which form specific shapes given only an outline or a silhouette of a basic shape. Negative space art also supports this idea. Negative space refers to the empty spaces the art is created around, between, and within, not just the subject of the art. Young children's use of spatial language directly relates to later skills at spatial problem solving. Some vocabulary you can use to support spatial relationships include words describing location or position, such as under, in front of. Use words that describe attributes, such as long and high, the side, angle, same, and symmetrical. You want to provide orientation statements, such as left, turn, match. And, of course, the geometric shape names, rectangle, triangle, and sphere. Pause just a moment to think about some of the ways you can incorporate spatial problem solving or spatial relationship vocabulary into their art projects. Creating sets is the ability to make groups of items in a logical way. It requires the skill of classifying. So, by observing and manipulating materials, children will show increasing ability to compare, match, sort objects into groups according to those attributes. Children will begin to show particular attention to the details of an object, often fixating on a particular feature. using a single color of paint palette until it's entirely gone while ignoring the others. Children will interact differently with familiar materials. That means making it all that much more important to vary their art experiences. Children continuously change how they work each time a material is introduced. So they'll learn new properties of it or develop ideas on ways to experiment. So reintroducing a familiar media with unfamiliar tools is a great way to expand on this thinking. On a very, very simple level, children associate objects with one another, such as markers go with paper and smocks are used for painting. A little bit more complicated area of classification, children will begin to sort in order of groups of one or two features. They'll separate basic features like shape, collecting all square things, or color by piling up all blue. This leads to sorting objects by more than one attribute. So everything that's square, and then grouping by one or two features. This creates more complicated groupings. Children will begin to sort by multiple features and or by use, such as all stuffed animals are grouped together, but then they separate it by size, then color, and then things that fly. Young children become more interested in math if their experiences have purpose and match their abilities. Since math concepts are abstract, early experiences should always begin with concrete materials. Some art activities that do this are collages. They can begin to use things by groups and by type, such as by color or shape, or creating collages of ocean animals. Incorporating texture also helps classifications, giving them another characteristic to use. Texture rubbings are a great way to do this. Another art activity that will help with categorizing and classifying is by color seriation, working with different shades of the same thing. Theme or seasonal artwork is another way to incorporate the idea of classification. So go ahead and take a few minutes to think about some art projects that you use that can focus on the idea of classification and the attributes of items that they use in materials. Young children are beginning to describe and compare their physical world. We just looked at ways that they are starting to classify, sort, and group objects into categories. Measuring will expand the groups and sets that it can create by including areas such as volume, weight, length, height, temperature, or even time. Through art, children will show increased understanding of these measurable properties and begin to learn how to quantify those properties. They can develop and demonstrate awareness of the property of size. They'll choose larger paper to take to the easel. They can explore how size affects objects and how they interact. They may start using many sizes of brushes with the same color of paint. Children can begin to understand the measurable properties when they use their hands to indicate how much tape they think they need. They also identify the differences with comparative words. Their vocabulary will start to include longer pipe cleaners, noting that larger clay structures will take longer to dry because of their size. Orders by measurable properties means that they start placing things in sets and order by size, placing tall materials behind shorter materials when they're creating a diorama. They will use of tools to measure, such as footsteps to measure an area they needed for sidewalk chalk mural, or balances pieces of a mobile on a scale when creating a mobile. They'll start testing length of a ribbon against their wrist when they're creating bracelets or making jewelry. When teaching measurement skills to young children, it provides lots of opportunities to explore objects by size. Use art activities and experimenting with art materials to help children understand measurement concepts. Some activities that lend themselves to this are murals, string art, mobiles, and three-dimensional structures. To encourage discussion of properties by size, use comparing different objects with appropriate language, such as, this craft stick is shorter than that one, but it is heavier. Describe their physical world with directional words, such as in front of, behind, on top of, next to, and below. Comparing different objects using appropriate language. This craft stick is shorter than that one, but it is heavier. You can describe their physical world with directional words, in front of, behind, on top of, next to, and below. So go ahead and take a few minutes to think about how you can incorporate properties of measurement into the art activities as they work. Understanding the relationship between cause and effect is important in building mathematical thinking. As your child learns behaviors cause action, it helps develop early communication and cognition skills. Art can help children develop increasing ability to observe, anticipate, and reason about the relationship between cause and effect. A first indicator is when a child anticipates an action. They may begin to start carrying water more carefully to prevent spills. They often repeat actions to duplicate their results. Repeat spinning of a brush on canvas to create a swirl pattern over and over again. Children will begin to seek out reasons for the cause and effect. For example, a very young child may try using the other end of a marker to scribble, just to see what will happen and why one end works and the other doesn't. Older children that have a few more experiences under their belt will begin to take preemptive action in advance, such as taping down a paper when they're working outside, or they'll use a small container to keep their collage materials organized as they work. On the higher end, they can begin to verbalize and explain their reasoning. They know that if I use too much glue, it will rip the paper and not dry. Or say things like, I need a bigger roller to cover my paper faster. Older children also understand variations affect change. They'll start to swing harder to create a more of an arc when splatter painting, or they'll move the marker slower, press the crayon harder to deepen the color. Preschoolers may be more interested in being able to mix and manipulate art materials than in what they're actually creating. Remember, at the beginning, we talked about process versus product-driven art? Don't be surprised if a child works very hard with media and materials, but isn't interested at all in preserving the work. We've all seen a colorful painting become a pile of brown paper sludge. It's all part of the process. Some activities that support this work are marble paint or any other painting activity that requires an independent movement. Fold over art, crayon melting, and any transfer or printing work. Some cause and effect linking words are because, since, and so. For example, you could point out that because the paper is wet with paint, it will tear very easily. Or since we used glue, we'll have to wait to move our birdhouse. The melting tray is warm, so we will have to move the crayons around it with sticks instead of touching it. So these can be extended by if-then statements. Think for just a few minutes about art that involves the action of cause and effect. At this point, I'm going to encourage you to take the last of the session and think about the example activities and the vocabulary extensions that we shared. Try and apply the same planning and facilitation extensions to the following additional math concepts. You can think about number sense and quantity, remembering that that's when students are beginning their experience with numbers through counting, that numbers have name, and recognizing written numbers. Students are learning to count objects and understand one-to-one correspondence, and they're also starting to compare different sets of objects that use appropriate language. Some other concepts are symmetry, which is the balanced distribution of duplicate shapes. It's literally, the word symmetry means allowing an object to be divided into two equal parts, such that one part coincides with the other. Think about every butterfly project you've ever done. So when you are thinking about extending math concepts into activities, some very common math concepts, how can you embed that in familiar art activities such as paper mache? Graphing, as I mentioned earlier, is a way of recording and communicating observations and data in a visual way. What is some of the language or some of the art materials that you can use in graphing and creating grids? Lastly, encourage children to touch different objects and count out loud. Move objects in new ways and move them around from one group to another. Use comparing words such as more than, less than, and the same as often during art and other curricula. So please just take a few more minutes and begin writing some ideas and thoughts and possibilities that you'd like to take back to your classroom. And thank you for joining me. As always, we're very interested to hear about your favorite math activities, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.